Hey, what's up, cats and kittens? And shout out to all my cerebral lights. It is me, the Cerebral Diva, and I'm back with another story time. Yes, yes, yes. So it looks like today is sort of a slow news day. There's not a lot happening. But I didn't want you guys to feel like I neglected you or that I'd forsaken you for my own life. So I'm back with a story time. And this should be a pretty interesting story time. It's actually going to be sort of a companion story time. I'm going to tell you guys one portion, and then I'm probably going to come back and tell you, first I'm going to tell you how I fell in love, and then I'm going to tell you guys how what seemed like a great love story sort of ended on a down note. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how I fell in love over the telephone. This is my first boyfriend ever. And thank goodness the universe saw fit to give me a good man as my first boyfriend, because he sort of set the precedent for me moving forward. And unfortunately, I guess you could say to some degree he spoiled me, and it's made it very difficult for me moving forward in terms of dating, because the bar has been set so high that my expectations in terms of how I'm treated as a woman are very, very high. And it's not like in terms of materialism and you know, acquisitiveness. Like, I don't need a lot of stuff. I'm not a woman who requires a lot by in terms of, you know, designer this or designer that. You know, I'm a frugalista. You know, I'm always looking for the best deal. I'm always looking to save money, even when it's my man's money. So I'm not that sort of quote unquote gold digging type, if you will. And I'm also a self-made woman. I work and earn my own money, so I don't necessarily need a man for money. But this particular guy, I don't know who raised him. I don't know how he was reared, but he is probably one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. And I don't know if he'll ever hear this video, but if he does, you know, hopefully he knows, because I'm pretty expressive to the people in my life who matter to me. And it's a small group of people. You know, I'm not a person who extends myself to a lot of people, but he's one of the few people who has withstood the test of time. So without further ado, let's get right into the story. So I was working as a receptionist at this particular time. And I remember it was sort of a cold winter day, and I lived in Minneapolis at this point in time. And there was a news periodical called City Pages. Now, if you're from New York, you probably heard of the Village Voice. And City Pages is comparable to the Village Voice. It's one of those free papers that you get that has all of the cool bands playing. Way back before there was a Craigslist and that sort of thing, you know, you would go back and you would search the personal ads in the back of City Pages if you were looking for something kinky to get into. So that was City Pages, and I worked as a receptionist there. So one day I was at work. It was a cold fall day, probably somewhere in like October, and the phones were ringing incessantly. And so it rang this one time, and I picked up the phone, and, you know, in my receptionist voice, "Thank you for calling City Pages. How may I direct your call?" And so the guy on the other end of the phone began asking me questions about Minneapolis. Now, I answered the questions to the best of my ability, but he started asking me questions about music and sort of, you know, the best places to play, and, you know, but I'm not a musician by any stretch of the imagination. I cannot sing if my life depended on it. It's interesting because people always compliment the tonality of my voice and say that you should sing, but if you heard me sing, you'd know that tonality and singing are mutually exclusive, especially when it applies to me. Excuse me. So he's asking me all these questions about bands and, you know, Prince and so on and so forth. And this is long before the Prince era had passed. So this is not like Purple Rain days. Purple Rain, all that stuff happened when I was like knee high to a bullfrog. So, you know, I'm a young adult at this particular point in time. I believe I was like 18, if I'm not mistaken. So he was asking me questions, and I gave him, like I said, I answered the questions to the best of my ability. So at one point, the conversation started going on, and that I could see on the switchboard that I had calls backed up. So I kept trying to put him on hold and come back to him, but for whatever reason, these calls were just refusing to give me a little time to talk to this guy. So I at one point I got back on the phone with him and I said, I really appreciate you calling, but unfortunately, my calls are getting backed up, so I'm going to have to go now. And he says, okay, well, thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate your time. And then we hung up the phone, and that was that. Now, all that day, his voice just kept resonating in my consciousness. I could not stop thinking about his voice. So I went home. I talked to my best friend at the time, and my best friend, his name was Iman. He was a gay, my gay best friend. He's since passed on, God rest his soul. And, we were talking, and he's like, oh, bitch, whatever. You think everyone likes you. He's just, Iman was one of those people who just sort of told it to you the way he saw it. And sometimes, frankly, quite the way it was. And while I do not think that everyone is after me, it was just one of those exchanges that we had. So he says that to me. We sort of laugh it off. We go about our day, and that was that. So the following day, I go back into work. I'm doing my thing, answering phone calls, faxing, emailing, all the things, all of my receptionist duties, ordering packages, ordering office supplies, accepting deliveries, etc., etc. So all of a sudden, the phone rings, and I immediately recognize the voice. It's him. So my heart begins to palpitate. My stomach starts to get butterflies. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's him, it's him, it's him. So, of course, I'm not saying that out loud, but that's definitely what I'm thinking in that particular moment. So we began talking once again, and true to form, the switchboard starts lighting up. I mean, pretty much every light was illuminated, callers back to back. So I'm putting him on hold again, coming back, putting him on hold. And so finally, I said to him for a second time, I'm going to have to get ready to get off of here because, my phone is getting pretty busy. And he says to me, well, if can I ask you a favor? And no, he said, if I ask you something, would you say yes? That's what he said. And I said, well, it depends on what you're asking me. And he said, well, I'm asking if I could have your personal phone number. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, and now I wanted him to ask for my phone number. I'm not going to lie. I had no idea what this guy looked like. I had no idea if he was a serial killer. There was just something about him that made me want him to be connected to me. So I gave him my phone number. I got off work probably around maybe 6:30 that evening. I went home. Now, this is the back in the day when you had a cell phone. I think I had a cell phone, a pager, and a home phone. So I get home, and he calls almost the second I walk through the door. I put my bags down. I pick up the phone, and before I knew it, it was like 6 a.m. the following day. We literally talked from the moment I walked through my front door until 6 a.m. I did not sleep a wink. I mean, we just talked and talked about life, about dreams, about goals, about aspirations, about successes and failures. I mean, it was just like, I don't know, that whole thing about kindred spirits and soulmates and so on and so forth. It was really something organic about the connection that he and I shared in that particular moment. So at 6 a.m., obviously, I have to start getting ready to go to work. So I get off the phone, and I'm just on cloud nine. However, I haven't slept in the last 24 hours. So I remember going into the bathroom stalls and like sitting down in a corner trying to catch like little cat naps for like 5 or 10 minutes to just make it through the day. Because while I didn't regret being on the phone all night, my body was definitely rebelling for not having adequate sleep. So I make it through work. He calls me as soon as I get home, just like clockwork, and we stay on the phone. But this time I'm like, look, I have to get some sleep the following day. So from that moment on, we pretty much talked all the time. You know what? I'm skipping a very important part of this story too. Now, before he came into my life, there was someone else that I was talking to, but we weren't like officially a couple or anything. So there was this other guy that I was sort of kind of seeing, and he told me that he was going on a road trip with his cousin to Las Vegas or something or other, and he and I were communicating frequently, and then one day he just fell off the face of the earth, and then that's when the phone guy came into my life. So we talked when I got home from work for a second day, and from that day forward, we talked pretty much every day. Not pretty much, we talked every day, all day. Now keep in mind, we still haven't exchanged pictures. We have no idea what each other looks like. This is before the days of Instagram, Facebook. This is like early MySpace days. So I wound up we actually wound up believe this is how antiquated this story is. We actually wound up communicating via U.S. Postal Service mail. So he wound up getting my address and sending me some pictures, and I sent him some pictures. And when he sent the pictures to me, I was like, oh my God, he's so handsome. He looks like Brian McKnight. The picture of Brian McKnight, because this is who he looks like. So I'm like, this is my type. He's tall, he's dark, he's handsome, he's sweet, he's kind, he's considerate, he's consistent, which is so important to me. And so the love affair began. I just began to fall in love with him over and over. Now, the true test when you fall in love with someone over the phone is what happens when you meet each other in person. So we've been talking for probably about 6 months. It had to be closer to a year, actually. We had been talking pretty much every day. And so finally we had made a decision that it was time to meet. So he was flying from Detroit, Michigan to Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is where I was living. And by now I was no longer working at City Pages. I was actually working at a bank. It was called North Star, but it's Wells Fargo now. Excuse me. So I was working at North Star Bank in the mortgage loan department. So he flies in to see me, and when I go to the airport to pick him up, there he is. He has a teddy bear, he has flowers, he's so handsome in person, and I just run over and hug him and kiss him. It was just like, like we'd been together for all of our lives. And so it was an instant connection. It just fit. It was a puzzle piece that really just fit instantaneously. So we go back home, we hang out, we sit up playing music. He loved music, I love music. We just sat up and just talked all night. And then the following day I had to go to work, and then I came back. Now, it was close to my birthday. My birthday is in November, by the way. Shout out to all my Scorpios and Sagittariuses. So it was close to my birthday, and it was the weekend. So he was supposed to stay for about a weekend. Now, his birthday was he was supposed to leave on Monday. So he got there probably Thursday. So Thursday was great. Friday was great. Saturday was fantastic. But Sunday, I sulked the entire day. I was just in such a melancholy mood because I knew that the following day he was leaving. So even though he was trying his best to sort of pull me out of that funk, it was just hard for me to do so. So it got later in the evening, and the later it got in the evening, the more emotional I became, because I knew that, time was slowly ticking away. So I started getting really emotional. You girls, you know how we can be. So I remember crying, and there was like, I had this whole soundtrack playing, all these sad songs, and Toni Braxton and R. Kelly and Lenny Williams, and just a bunch of sad R&B music. So I'm crying. I'm creating the soundtrack to make sure that I'm creating the somber mood that I just wanted to be immersed in. And so he keeps trying to console me, saying, babe, stop crying. I'm coming back in New Year's. We're going to be together forever, blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't like I was crying because I didn't think I was ever going to see him again. I was really just sad because I didn't want to see him go. Regardless as to whether he was coming back or not, I felt like I didn't want him to leave. So at some point, I was just crying so much. My eyes began to swell, and I went to the bedroom, and I was lying down, and he said, it's hard for me to watch you cry like this. He's like, just let me take a walk for a little bit. So he leaves, he takes a walk. I'm laying in the bed crying, and then ultimately I cried myself to sleep. So the next thing I remember was him crawling in the bed behind me and sort of in that spooning position, and he draped his arm across me and put his mouth right near my ear, and he said, "You don't have to cry anymore. I'm not going anywhere." Oh my gosh. It makes me a little emotional now just thinking about it. He said, "I'm not going anywhere." This man left his job. He left his house. He left pretty much everything, his family. He left everything he had and started life all over from scratch just to be with me. Now, as if that was not enough, he just became more and more incredible. And when I tell you guys these stories, you'll understand why I say he really set the bar high in terms of how I expect to be treated by a man. So I told you guys it was really close to my birthday. So when he decided to stay, obviously he didn't really have a support system other than me. He didn't really have a way to get around other than me. He didn't really know his way around other than me. He didn't have a job. He only had the money that he saved to come out there. So, I mean, he was really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of sustenance, in terms of finances, you know. And I didn't mind that because, look, this is a cake I baked. I asked him to stay. So if I'm going to ask him to stay and this is who I want to be with, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to ride. I have a job. I'm working. So in this interim period while he's trying to get on his feet, then I'm going to make sure that we're both okay. So it's my birthday. I get up, I get dressed to go to work, and he's like, "Okay, babe, have a good day." You know, and he was at home because he was still in the process of looking for work. And he gives me a kiss and he says, "You know, I'll see you when you get home." And so I leave, I go to work, and, you know, we're texting all day. And when I come home from work, he's nowhere to be found. So I start, you know, scouring the apartment. I'm looking for, you know, signs that he didn't leave, you know, because my thought was maybe he couldn't bear to leave in front of me, so he waited until I left to leave. That was what my thought process was. But his clothes were still there. His shoes were still there. His, you know, all of his music was still there. So his luggage, you know, so I knew that he hadn't left because all of his stuff was still there. But I'm sitting here wondering to myself, where could he be? You know, because he doesn't know anyone here aside from myself. So at some point, after an hour or two passed, I really started to get panic stricken. So I'm calling hospitals, I'm calling the police department, I'm calling his family, I'm calling anyone I can think of to see if anyone has heard from him. So it's probably about 7 p.m., 8 p.m. at some point. You know, it gets dark really early during the winter months. So it's pitch black outside, you know, and my heart is like sitting in my stomach. You know, I'm wringing my hands because walking back and forth, pacing, like wondering what's happened to him. And all of a sudden I hear footsteps coming up the front of my home. And I rush downstairs to open the door. And this man, you guys, it was probably, this particular moment stands as the single most important romantic gesture that any man has ever done for me. I go to the door, I sling the door open, and he's standing there covered from head to toe in dirt, grass stains, mud on his face, mud in his hair, manure on the bottom of his shoes. But in his hand, he's holding the most pristine birthday cake, and it says, "Happy birthday to my baby." And let me tell you what he did. While I was at work, because he didn't have money, because he didn't have work, he went online and found a temp agency, some sort of daily labor place, and went and worked all day long, shoveling horse manure, just to buy me a cake for my birthday. And I'm telling you guys, I have had men buy me cars. I've had men buy me houses. I've had men give me thousands of dollars. I've had pretty much any material item a man can give to you, I've had that gifted to me from a man. But nothing has ever meant more to me than this particular cake. That cake is what set the bar in terms of what I look for. That's what I look for, because it wasn't about money. It was about the thought that he put in. It was about the effort that he put into it. It was about the fact that he said to himself, I know I don't have much, but I'm going to do what I can. And that is the type of man that you want to give your all to. Now, unfortunately, you guys, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, if he was so good, what happened? You know, things happened over time where we began to grow apart. Now, I am happy to report that even though we're no longer together, he is currently my best friend. He's the person I call whenever things good happen to me, whenever there's a crisis situation, and vice versa. But I don't think that he was the person that I was ultimately meant to be with. I definitely think he was the person who was meant to teach me that this is how a man is supposed to love you. So I hope the story wasn't too long. I hope it wasn't too boring. I'm going to come back with a part 2, and I'm going to tell you guys how we broke up, because how we broke up is quite a doozy. So yeah, that's it for this story time. If you have any questions, any comments, and you know, I also hope this is, if you're a woman, if you're a guy, whomever you are, if you're listening to this story, I hope this story really inspires you in terms of, you know, choosing a partner and choosing a mate, making sure that you choose a person who really, really understands what it means to value the person that they're with. That's what he taught me. And, you know, countless guys before have said or since then have said to me, oh my gosh, you've been hurt by men. And I'm just like, no, sweetheart, I have not been hurt. I've been treated exceptionally well by men. That is where the problem lies. I've been treated so well that it's hard for me to accept your bullshit. So I hope that you, hearing this story, will make you dial back on accepting bullshit and tolerating bullshit from people who don't deserve you. So yeah, that's it, you guys. Anyhow, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely comment below, because I'm really curious to hear your input on this particular story. Remember to follow me across all social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. Also, as always, in closing, remember to live better, love harder, and think smarter. It is me, the Cerebral Diva, and I will talk to you guys soon. I'm actually going to come right back with part 2 of this story, so stay tuned.